Hey guys, it's Ezra, and welcome to this project breakdown of a short film that I created called The Knowledge of Good and Evil.
You will be like God. You will be like God.
All right, so this film was my first ever passion project. I didn't have a client, I didn't have, a deadline, but I just really felt passionate about this idea of sort of a modern interpretation of the story in Genesis where the serpent comes to Adam and Eve and he tries to convince them that by knowing everything, they'll be like God and their life will be better off. And I saw this sort of like parallel between that story and what we're experiencing in modern day with just the unlimited amount of knowledge at our fingertips. It was ultimately like a slow death that occurred. And I feel like that's kind of happening to us in our modern society and all that stuff. So obviously we could get into that forever, but that was kind of the concept behind it. So this was just a one-day shoot at this warehouse in Nashville called Four Wall. Fun fact about this shoot is the day right after this short film, we basically kept that same setup and we just repurposed it for a bunch of promo content that we wanted to shoot for Ezco and the new pack that we were releasing at the time called Ruins. And so even though we invested our own money, it ended up being paid for in the long run because of what we did on the second day. So that's kind of a cool fun fact and a great way to think about how to fund your own films in the future. So the question was, how big of a green screen was used in this? And the answer is no green screen. This was an actual LED wall, about 15 feet tall by 8 feet wide. Everything was captured in camera. That made it super easy for us to be able to really feel that in the moment. And that's the beauty of working with LED walls and studying the art of tour visuals. You get this incredible source of light, and that's pretty much all we used. I think we might have used a sky panel on like a rolling stand for a couple insert shots, but those were kind of the main sources of light for the entire shoot. Did you score it in post, or did you have the music decided before production? All of the stuff that happens on the second half, that was a song from a pack that Jeremy Latito and Darren King released on Ezco. And when they were working on that, I was working on this treatment at the same time, and I couldn't stop listening to this song and visualizing the edits and the whole thing coming together to that song. How do we do the floating shots? So yeah, this was all done by a wire harness rig. We had a stunt coordinator who makes sure that it was safe. We had a mat that was underneath, but it was basically done a whole chest strap and then a knee strap. But yeah, all of that was done in camera as well, which allowed us to really play with that light in the moments. What did you shoot on and what lens and filtration combo did you use? We shot on the Alexa. We shot on some vintage glass that I can't remember for the life of me, and I'm so sorry. But we did, it already had a lot of character and glow and sort of some chromatic aberration. But we did also then shoot through a black Pro Mist filter, I think it was a 1/8, just to add a little bit more bloom to that LED wall and sort of soften the gap between the pixels. How much of this project was storyboarded and planned in pre versus ideas that we ran with in production and post? So on this film, I had a general sense of where I wanted to go, but a lot of this really did come together in the edit. And so I'm super excited to sort of dive in and show you some of those happy accidents, sort of see, some earlier drafts of the film, and why we ended up making some of the decisions that we did. But let's just dive into this timeline and we'll kind of see, how we laid all this out. All All right, so here we are in Premiere, and I'm just gonna quickly sort of break down how I've labeled and organized the different clips in this project so we can kind of stay on the same page moving forward through the rest of this breakdown. So up on top, I've got our final color. This is a single file that, we kind of just laid on top of this whole edit for now, just so we can kind of keep things organized a little bit nicer and just kind of keep it looking like the final, but I'm gonna turn it off for now so you can see what's underneath. This is the log footage. These dark blue layers down here, these are all of our footage files, and that took up, 99% of this project. Very, very little VFX that happened in this project, mainly in camera, with a couple editing tricks that were pretty simple that I'll show you. Underneath all of this, I usually set a black layer, just a black solid layer under my edit, because what happens if I turn this off, you're gonna see film grain when it's set to the right blending mode. It doesn't know what to do when it's sitting on top of just normal transparency. So I normally set a black layer just to establish like, all right, when in doubt, black is underneath. It's not gonna be transparent, it's not alpha. So that really helped. So all this tan stuff is just a single black layer. Again, blue is our main footage. The next thing up here is this light blue. We've got this snow layer. And this is what created those sort of, almost think like Stranger Things upside down, like sort of creepy particles. It's essentially this clip that I found on Video Hive one day, and it's just basically snow falling towards you. I think it was created in After Effects. It's not real snow because it loops perfectly, but this just is one of my favorite little elements that I've found over the years. Next up, we've got in green, we've got some grain layers. So we have this like very dirty one from the Dirty Letterboxes pack, creating a bunch of like chaos there. Then back in here, we have our 35mm film grain, which is sitting over the entire film. I think it's at maybe like it's an 80% opacity, so not full strength there, but just kind of really helped kind of tie it all together, especially sitting over digital footage. You want to just kind of soften that and bring some organic texture. So that felt really nice. And then on top here, we have little moments of this 8mm film grain that I mainly just used on the title sequences. And something that I learned on this project specifically was that it's really cool to be able to tint your grain layers. So before, this was kind of distracting because we had this red title, kind of a sort of nice organic feeling background. And then sitting on top of it was like this white grain that just felt kind of distracting and kind of pulled your eyes away from this title. To beat that, I still wanted the texture, but we ended up tinting this red, and it just added a nice little texture, sort of a vintage feeling to that whole title sequence. And then we have this tan layer, which is basically our a letterbox that ends up sort of growing. You can see the scale properties. It basically ends up like sort of getting wider in this sequence to sort of open things up, as almost like an analogy of like his mind opening up as he's sort of flooded with all of the knowledge of good and evil. We added a fast blur, and you can see that without it, it's like a pretty hard edge. I wanted, again, to sort of have this organic feeling. And so because the footage has so much sort of glow and character, sort of a nice soft bloom from that vintage glass, I wanted to be able to match that with all of our effects, whether it was film or fonts or, this letterbox. And so it's got a little fast blur on there. Okay, these orange layers here, and I'll dive into this a little bit more in a little bit, but essentially we have our wire removal shots. So if I turn off this orange, you're gonna see underneath is like this hideous shot with wires pulling up through his clothes, and it looks pretty terrible. Thankfully, we shot this on a tripod, so it was actually super easy to remove these wires and fix. And with generative fill and Photoshop and all that stuff, it would have been easy, even easier if we did it now. But I'll show you how we pulled that off in just a little bit. Then we have that snow on top again, just to sort of like pull it all together. Then final thing in this timeline, which I'll kind of like hint at as we go, is these red clips, which are disabled, are basically like shots that we ended up cutting, like almost entire scenes that we ended up shooting and then getting into the edit and being like, what were we thinking? That's kind of the process. You kind of just like don't hold anything too precious because you never know if it's not going to work. So you have to kind of like take off director hat and go like, all right, it's not working in the edit, so let's just pivot. So one of those scenes here, I'll show you. I think it's kind of funny. Probably went a little bit too far. It's kind of comical. We had this like scene where he's like essentially like worshiping all of these like corporate logos, and it just felt kind of cheesy and very like it's a little cringy, but hey, it was a good shot. So just an idea there of everything that's in this project. But let's kind of just go scene by scene, and I'll kind of explain sort of the motivation behind some of the scenes. We'll dive more into the effects, like those transition moments, the wire removal, all that stuff, and we'll go from there. All right, so this opening scene with the swipe was definitely kind of like a happy accident. I was kind of like, the original sort of concept for this video was that it was set in this like sort of modern garden idea. And I'll show you how that felt. We had this whole thing of him like in this garden scene, and it was kind of like we had a bunch of flowers. It was still minimalistic, but it was really focused on this whole concept of him being in the garden. And it just ended up feeling really cheesy and taking way too much time. If you watch some of this intro scene that we had originally, it was just like, it was kind of just over dramatic. You know what I mean? Had just things that didn't really make sense. And I don't know, it just felt kind of flat. So we had a bunch of stuff like that. But the more that time went by, and this was edit 2, as you can see here. I think this final was like version 19. So we went through a lot to find this. But as I was scrubbing through the footage, there was just something that kept standing out about this shot. It was kind of this haunting shot, almost like he was like a zombie that was kind of just scrolling on autopilot, even though his senses and his brain was kind of dead. And my goal is always to find these sort of like iconic moments that you'd remember. And so this felt like that when we sort of finally stumbled upon this in the edit. It felt like, okay, this is the shot to open with, because it kind of sets up the expectation of what's going to happen. If you've already read the title, The Knowledge of Good and Evil, you have this interesting idea of what this could be about, but it creates a lot of intrigue, and there was something about that swipe that just felt very just captivating. So started out with that swipe. We kind of go into these titles really quick. I will show you that I did something here to make this feel even more filmic, which was basically going into our footage here, and you'll see the effect controls. I've got this brightness and contrast, basically just a little animation, like a little keyframe that essentially just took the brightness and contrast and just faded it up right at the last second, kind of like a film flash would. And then I have this little hole punch moment and all the grain on top of it. And so when you play that back, creates this nice little transition into that title. The sound design was also a very nice little happy accident, but I was essentially just kind of looking around on some different sound libraries, and I wanted something that kind of felt, sort of pulled you back into that biblical, scriptural kind of sense, almost to offset the need for setting up this whole garden scene. If we could just do it with sound instead of this sort of like medieval choral thing that was going on, it would kind of give you that sort of like eerie, but, historic kind of feeling. And so I stumbled upon that thing. I'm going to see if I can open this up, because I don't think this is how I think it sounded a lot different originally. So this is the original. Okay, no, that's just how it sounded. I think someone basically just took this choir and it was just a really bad tape recording. And so there's a lot of wobble on it and character. And so the original doesn't have all those, groans and wind and all that kind of stuff. It just basically plays like this. Super short clip, but we were able to take that and then build some other moments around it to sort of like, create this whole concept. A lot of the sound design was done between myself in the end, but it started out with my co-editor, Jacob Blank, who took the first like 3 or 4 passes at this film. And he created a lot of sound design moments of like that electricity of the screen kind of coming to life. He did all the voices where you hear the voice saying, "You will be like God." And it's like this whole like distorted thing that was really cool. So we can get more into sound in a little bit, but so that's kind of the first intro shot. Again, finding that sort of thesis image was super important. And then let's just play this. So that's a really quick sequence of shots here. This red stuff, I think you'll see if I turn this off. So we had this like title moment that just felt way too soon for that. But what we ended up doing is basically just really quick sequence of shots. So it's 3 little moments that just focus on the flower, which is kind of like this metaphor for the garden, and then him turning around and being sort of intrigued by this thing that comes to life. It's a slow pan around. We've got the brightness on this pushed pretty hard, but it was a pretty bright shot. We would just basically use this as the only source of light. I think we have a sky panel just off here to create a little bit of, fill. But as he walks towards it, the idea of using even this arch was very intentional because we wanted it to feel, arches have sort of a church Renaissance feeling to them. And we wanted it to feel as if he was walking towards something really good and something that was holy and beautiful and heavenly. And then, we have this moment where you hear the voice saying, "You will not die, you'll be like God." And as he walks towards it, he's intrigued and it looks beautiful, right? He's kind of like drawn to it. But then as he touches it, the idea is that as he touches it and sort of like, steps out, we had a whole scene where he like dropped the flower and it was this thing. But the idea is that as he actually engages with it, he sort of becomes like entranced and hypnotized by it. And it transforms him, it sort of takes his soul essentially. And we move into this whole other section of the film. And so I had a couple people ask about this moment, and I'm going to play it really quick and then sort of explain everything that went into creating this transition. But we did a lot of little tricks in here just to sort of tie things together, from the music shifting to little things that we did to add flicker and things like that. So let's just play that. All right, so a couple things going on here. We have this moment where he reaches out and touches it. Then we have this moment where he's kind of getting the first dose, and we have those electricity sounds to sort of like, connect it all. The screen's going absolutely crazy. What we ended up having to do, this was kind of an interesting thing. So if you go into this clip and we pull up our effect controls, you can see that we have a nested sequence here. And if we open this, you can see that we have two clips tied together that are the same clip, but one of them has this flicker on the front end. It's a strobe light effect. And the next one is clean. It doesn't have it. The reason why we had to do that is because if you just click into this clip itself, you can see that there was no flicker on that, shot with the blue. And then it gets really flickery because of all the changing images. And it felt kind of anticlimactic to have this big moment where he touches it and all this stuff, and then it not be flickering, to kind of go like flicker and then not flicker and then back to flicker. So we needed to add that flicker essentially. So if we come back to our timeline here and go to the program, you can see that we just added this flicker. It's the strobe light effect set to a 50% blend with the original. And with a random strobe probability. These numbers are basically what I start with every time, just to get a good feeling on this effect. But that's what's going on underneath. And then we had that same concept on a lot of this. And we had to be really careful because that strobe effect can be really cheesy and make it feel like you're just editing the brightness. But we did it, so carefully and with enough little moments and sound design moments to sort of motivate it that it ended up playing pretty well. So again, that sound design really helps sell the idea that there's something buzzing and that this is an organic texture. And then once we colored it, it really helped too, because you can kind of feel the glow, and the contrast really kind of sells the whole thing a little bit better. So again, a very important moment in sort of the transition. We also have, if you're listening, we have this like sound design moment where we take that choral effect, and we have a couple different instances of it here, but we essentially took the plugin straight from Premiere called Pitch, AU Pitch, and we created a keyframe on the pitch to basically create that pitch down effect where it kind of like gets distorted and kind of creepy, So if we play just that, pretty cool. So yeah, that really helped that moment as well to just kind of transition, because it was really hard figuring out how to blend all these musical elements and bring something to life in this way. All right, so we keep playing. We kind of get through this sequence with all the flicker. You see the letterbox starts to open. And then this is where we really kind of let things loose a little bit. And the music drops. So that right where that music drops, we knew that it was going to be really important. First of all, the shot before the drop is important because you get this tie-in to the knowledge of good and evil and the story of Adam and Eve right here. Thought that was a kind of a fun play-in, or play with that effect. We have this film flash that then takes us into this very wide scrolling shot where you see that he's doing that same motion that he was doing in the intro. So we sort of begin to feel that tie-in. And of course, we have this wide shot that was a very happy accident. This idea of him just scrolling on a phone, this sort of oversized 15-foot, tall phone, in sort of a zombie-like state. We had a bunch of visuals prepped that you kind of see throughout this whole thing. And this ended up being the thing on set that we all went like, whoa, like something's happening. Like this could be special. And so all this was done all in camera. There's even some stuff that I wasn't super happy with. Like I should have planned a little bit better. Like you can see that it's kind of cropping off the sides of some of these words and whatever. But we essentially just took this footage. Like I screen recorded my phone and scrolled through a bunch of stuff of like news footage and Instagram and all this kind of stuff, and then got like an overlay of the phone shape off of Google Images, and just overlaid it on top. We played all that back through Resolume and just had him just swipe. And so then the low ground fog really helps tie things in. We've even got these book pages that you see in a minute. So yeah, it was just kind of like this shot that ended up really feeling great for some reason. And then of course with more of that snow on top, and all that kind of stuff, things just start to feel really, really creepy really quick. More swiping. This concept was basically taking a bunch of the viewfinder overlays from the Esco assets and just, playing them as almost this idea of like selfies and photography and this whole like overly captured society that we're in. Keep playing this. Again, we have these like jump cut moments, but we have this paper, which was literally just finding a bunch of, vintage books, tossing the pages in the air in slow motion, and between the fog and the books and the backlight, it just has this really great moment. But we sort of jump cut in between scenes of him, standing there with and without the paper, which feels kind of fun. So sort of a cycle of all these images, and then sort of this zombie-like movement. We sort of like hint back at these like what could have been and these like almost regretful moments in the edit where we go like, man, I shouldn't have touched it. And it also hints at the idea of like, you will be like God. Like he has this sort of like, you feel almost this sense of like pride when he does that look. It's kind of like you find these little subtle movements when you're directing where you're like that look behind with that arch, and then tying in the whole concept of you will be like God. It felt really powerful to just kind of include that halfway through this edit. Especially right before seeing him floating in sort of his most dead, levitated sort of phase. So little moments like that putting them close enough felt really nice. More paper. That's definitely a standout moment as well. Kind of a happy accident with all these numbers on the screen. This was just, an asset that I think I found it on VideoHive as well. And it just felt perfect for that moment to be able to kind of play that and have him crawl away from it as if it's this like digital world that he can't escape. All of these images are from Unsplash, a combination of Unsplash and also the NASA archives. So NASA has a massive public domain library of images of different planets. And so putting them all together, I took a day one day and basically just downloaded a bunch of stock assets that are free to use in commercial property, in commercial projects, all that kind of stuff. And those sequences really helped sort of like tie in the whole concept really nicely here. More swipes, the sound design with that, kind of the regret of what could have been in the garden. And then the ultimate death at the crescendo of the song, followed by a final instance of this swipe concept. And that same transition out with the hole punch and all that kind of stuff. So I know I'm kind of just like rambling through all of this, but those were kind of the main, thoughts that went into each of these sections. Again, once we sort of get past that middle stage, it was really just sort of a trial and error thing and just looking for little happy accidents. It wasn't like ooh, I know exactly what we need next. It was basically me dragging and dropping stuff around until it felt right. This is nicely organized now to be able to keep things clear for this breakdown, but I can show you, let's see if we can find like a, version 17 or whatever it was. So yeah, you can see I'm usually quite disorganized, but it's literally just like taking this stuff, dragging it around, and kind of just seeing when it feels right. I have learned the hard way so many times now to not skimp on sound design. It is often when I feel frustrated with an edit, like things aren't coming together. It's usually because I haven't dived into sound design yet. Even if it's temporary, it just starts bringing the images to life and you start feeling how good the edit actually is, or bad or whatever. But it's such an important part of the process. I'll kind of show you what it looks like with just the sound design and how much was going on in there. So even that piano note was added. The paper, the swirls. That little moment of him swiping is really accentuated. Yeah, it just helps so much. So again, don't skimp on sound design. It's such an important part of the whole process. Most of those were either from the Esco Toolbox or from, just free libraries like freesound.org. I find a lot of stuff there. And again, a lot of happy accidents that you wouldn't expect. And then Audio Jungle. I also find a couple things if I'm looking for something very specific. It's a great cheap place to not have to buy an entire library, but just buy a single clip. And I like that resource a lot. I'll show you really quick how we accomplished this wire removal. Again, the original shot is not something to be proud of, and it kind of was another of those things that you really miss until it's done. Essentially, I just did it here in After Effects. There's a couple things going on here. There's, on the base clip, there is a plugin called Wire Removal, Simple Wire Removal in After Effects. So with that turned off, you can kind of see that we have these wires hanging here. Let me turn off these layers too, so you can kind of see what's going on. So this is how the shot looked before. And we just turned on that simple wire removal shot or effect. We had a couple different instances. With that, you essentially, I'll show you one of these. You essentially take this and you have an end point and a beginning point. And if we zoom in here, you can see that if I drag this, it basically just eliminates those wires. It's a little messy, and so you kind of have to do it quickly or figure out how to, blend it a little bit. But you can adjust the thickness, the mirror blend, all that kind of stuff. And so you just kind of play with that. It's a really helpful tool. And then the rest of the stuff on the body, so even with the wire removal done, the body looks insane. Like you can see this sharp second knee and all these crazy points, sharp points coming out of his chest. And so to do that, again, if I would have had generative fill in Photoshop, that's probably where I should have done it. But instead, I basically took duplicate versions of that shot. And because there's this big LED behind, we were able to use that content to help become a mask for those moments. And so I'm basically just turning on that mask every time. It's the same shot from behind, no effects or anything, but just laid on top. And essentially it's pulling from this white, this same glowing white, and just placing it nicely on top of him. And so one more time, again, you can see that's before and then after. So yeah, super simple to do, and had a really big impact, obviously, in the final edit. All right, so that's a general breakdown of this edit. I really hope that you guys enjoy this breakdown. To me, it really humanizes the whole experience of filmmaking a lot, to be able to just see someone's timeline and see all the mistakes and see all the things that were done to make something like this come to life. I'm super proud of this. Like I said, it is my first passion project I've ever done, of me investing my own money into an idea that I have with no client or anything like that. But if you guys have any more questions, I'd love to help answer. Any insights, any things that we could have done better, we'd love to hear it. Till the next one, happy editing.